Good afternoon. I'm Bob Bush at the Hakama Corporate Governance Summit at the fabulous Romani Hotel. I have just listened to what I think is probably the most interesting panel of the day on balancing conflicting stakeholders for state-owned enterprises. And I have the pleasure of sitting with Rima Al Masri, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Mumtalakat, a sovereign wealth fund in Bahrain. Thank you for joining us, Rima.
No, thank you for having me, Bob.
So on the topic of your panel, what is sort of the key issue around balancing these interests, particularly when you're working for state-owned, and in your case, a particular kind of state-owned enterprise like a sovereign wealth fund?
I think what we need to look at is what are the interests of the sovereign, firstly with certain enterprises, and then looking at what are the interests of the holding company in ensuring that the strategy is rolled out accordingly. It's a dual role. So we have certain entities that play a pivotal role in our economy, and so therefore they need to be managed in a particular way, as well as our investment interests as a sovereign wealth fund. What we look at is our role in the economy and how that plays out with the entities that we hold within our portfolio. We are in various sectors: telecommunications, aviation, education, healthcare, finance, you name it.
I think you're in everything other than oil and gas, which is
That's
a separate
right.
sovereign wealth
Exactly.
fund entity. Yeah? Okay.
Now, we've started off in 2006, established by royal decree with about 29 assets from the Ministry of Finance. Since then, that has grown to over 60 entities, both within Bahrain and outside. So initially, we would have been looking at 96% invested within MENA and locally. Now it's more like 62% in MENA, 30% in Europe, and 8% in the United States. That provides a nice synergy between those entities that we're looking at to grow our portfolio and our expertise, as well as a synergy with our current assets. And how is that translated to the wealth of Bahrain and also to our economy?
Right. And given your geographical diversification, do you effectively have different corporate governance practices and protocols depending on where your assets are in the world, or do you have one framework that you hope to apply wherever you happen to be invested?
We operate on best practice, and I think this is really important. So no matter where we are, be it on a home turf or elsewhere, best practice framework is in place. And of course, that needs to be tweaked accordingly, depending the jurisdiction that we're in. So, there are certain laws and regulations that are very specific to a particular sector in a particular country that we need to keep abreast of. But if our core framework is about excellence, then that sets the basis for corporate governance within Mumtalakat, which is very important, and it goes to the core.
One last question, I think, and this is, the difference between corporate governance in a state-owned enterprise or an SWF context versus previous experiences you've had in the private sector or maybe even a publicly listed company. Should they differ? Are they different? What is the main difference between an SWF corporate governance framework versus what you would expect to see in any investment company?
I think, a point of generalization, I would say that there shouldn't be a difference. If we're talking about transparency, if we're talking about growth, if we're talking about governance on top of a regulatory environment and ensuring that everything is run at an arm's length, then technically there shouldn't be a difference. Where it will differ is because of who your board are. For instance, within Mumtalakat, our board comprises of mostly various ministers. It's chaired by Second Deputy Prime Minister. But does that mean that they should be involved in day-to-day running of a business? Not really, because we wouldn't expect as Mumtalakat to be involved in the running of the day-to-day business within our companies, our portfolio companies. And so I think we've built a sound framework where we set the tone at the top through the board of Mumtalakat, And we trickle that down and try to mirror it within all of our portfolio companies and within all of our investments. And this is why it's important for us to ensure that we always have board representation in any investment that we venture into.
Thank you very much for those insights.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.